All right, we're continuing in the sermon series from the Exodus to Tribulation. We're looking at, is the Exodus fact? We are looking at, is it foreshadows of things to come, either immediately after the time of the Exodus and the future? And we are also looking at, is the Bible's account of it true? And the answer to all of that is yes, of course. We're in part 2 of this message. And tonight we are going to be looking at Exodus chapter 2. Actually, the rest of Exodus chapter 1 and Exodus chapter 2. I'll be finishing Exodus chapter 1, and Brother Clay will be doing Exodus chapter 2. All right, we're going to pick up in verse 11 and read to the end of chapter 1, and then we will discuss it. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not do so as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. All right, here's a couple things we're going to look at tonight. First of all, who was the Pharaoh at this time? We're also going to take a look at, and hold on to your seats, who built the pyramids? That's right. And there's going to be a lot of angry academics watching this video, and very possibly the entire country of Egypt may be upset when this sermon is done as well. We're going to also take a look at, was this a prophetic foreshadow of something that would happen later on in the future with the Messiah? All right, let's take a look at this. Verses 11 through 14. Let's take a look at the argument over who actually built the pyramids. I'm going to immediately say, against the wisdom and wise counsel of the experts on many history shows and many conspiracy shows, it was not the Martians. It was not the lizard people or the Greys. So the question is, who built the pyramids, and what in the world does this have to do with the book of Exodus? Let's take a look. Let's take a look at verse 14 again. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. Specifically, what was the hard bondage? Let's take a look. In mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. Quick question. What are the pyramids made of? Brick and mortar, inside and out. Now, here's what I want us to take a look at. First of all, is this account true? They were forced to build the slave city, or the slave city, the treasure storing cities of Pithom and Ramses. All right? They found the ruins of Pithom and Ramses decades ago. Now, quickly go to Exodus chapter 5. Exodus chapter 5, and let's take a look at verses 9 through 16. Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words. And the taskmasters of the people and their officers went out and spoke to the people, saying, Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go get yourselves straw where you can find it, yet none of your work will be reduced. So the people were scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, Fulfill your work, your daily quota, so when there was straw, as when there was straw. Also the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and were asked, Why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick both yesterday and today as before? You know, some people read the account of the plagues and actually have the audacity to say, oh, God was so harsh on the Egyptians. Does anyone know what's happening here? Let me put it in modern terms, okay? It's like you work construction, and on an average day in this heat, you're expected to get so much of a section of a wall built with cinder blocks. And we'll say the average masons can lay maybe a couple yards of a retention wall. All right? Now, when the workers arrive to work every morning, there's bags of concrete already there. There's a mixer already there. There's the dirt to mix with the mortar. Their trowels are already there. All the tools they need are already there at the site. So pretty much they arrive at work, they can get right to work. This is basically what's happening here. The foreman comes out because he had a meeting with the contractors and the attorneys. And the attorneys said, we know it's 100 degrees outside. We have decided, because we need this project done as fast as possible, we're going to go ahead and take their trowels and their chipping hammers. We're going to go ahead and remove the mixer and the bags of concrete. Now, we want 12 yards of retention wall built at the end of each day without any of their tools, because we want this done quickly. So the foreman comes on the job scene and says, all right, we're gonna build 12 yards of retention wall. No, put your trowels down. Guys, come and gather them up. You will have to go find your own tools. You will have to figure out a way to make concrete, and then you will have to figure out a way how to apply the concrete. You will have to figure out a way how to build this wall level without using levels. Everyone got that? Good. Get started. By the way, these guys over here will be smacking you across the back of your head with whips as you're working. If you understand what the Egyptians really did, you would have little to no sympathy when God rains down the plagues. Now, my heart is broken, of course, of reading the death of firstborn. because, they didn't have anything to do with it. But as far as the plagues go, if you really understand what they did to the Hebrews for 430 years, you'd actually be applauding God as he was bringing 430 years of justice that was due. Now, I went off on a rabbit trail again. Back to the point. All right. So basically, the bricks that are used here are mud and straw. They're formed together and they're left out to dry and bake, and then they're used to construct their projects. Pithom and Ramses was discovered. The ruins were discovered. Would anyone like to take a guess what the remaining ruins that were still standing were made of? Straw and mud bricks. What a coinky dink, huh? Now, to the pyramids. The pyramids are limestone bricks. Okay? The pyramids are limestone bricks. Now, if we go back into Exodus, why did the Egyptians decide to do this? Because the Israelite population, as we talked about last week, was the fruition of the covenant that was made to Abraham. Your offspring will be like the stars of heaven. They were outgrowing the Egyptian population. Now, if anyone knows anything about Egypt, it is a wonder. You have temples, magnificent, giant temples, and statues, and underground mazes. I mean, just some of the most elaborate building of the ancient world ever. Now, the Egyptians didn't build it. One, they don't have the population. They didn't have the population to do it with. Now, you take a people that are multiplying like rabbits over a period of centuries, and they're starting to outgrow your population. Guess what? In that Pharaoh's eyes, 2 words: labor force. They had the labor force to build it. Most of the things constructed that archaeologists have discovered go back to that time period. They go back to that time period. Now, the Hebrews, no, they didn't build the pyramids. The Egyptians did it. The aliens did it. Everybody in the known universe did it except for the people who had the numbers and were the only people in history there that were under forced labor. They couldn't have done it. Now, there's an area out in the Sinai Peninsula known as Sarabit el-Kadim. In the Bible, it's called Rephidim. In this area, they discovered mining caves, rich with turquoise and, guess what, with limestone. Now, what's really interesting here is an archaeologist not too long ago went out there before the loving religion of Islam went and collapsed Egypt and basically started killing everyone there that didn't agree with them. A little bit before that, an archaeologist went out there and found these caves out in Sarabit el-Kadim. And in one particular cave, he found a Hebrew inscription. Well, it's right below Israel. I mean, anyone Jewish could have went down there and wrote something on a wall. However, this Hebrew predates modern Hebrew, 1st century Hebrew, even later Israelite Hebrew. This is Hebrew of the time shortly after Genesis. And in this cave, there was an inscription in that ancient particular type of Hebrew, and it read, El helped me. El in Hebrew is God. Why would a Jewish man of ancient times be in a cave, feel the compulsion and the need to write, God help me? How about this? In all service, in all manner of service in the field, while you had one large group making bricks, another large group building pulley systems to move massive limestone bricks, you had another large group that was out in the area mining the limestone to make these massive large bricks. The oldest pyramid in Giza, known as the Pyramid of Khufu, in Greek that's Cheops, dates back to around that time, maybe a century before, give or take. When, at any point in Egypt's history, have they ever had a labor force that could have done that? While at the same time, by the way, be at war with several surrounding countries. Because at this time they were at war with the Hittites. They were at war with other surrounding countries. But here you have a population of people, they're not at war with anyone. You know what? The Pharaoh said, we are rather godlike. We should have monuments built to us. We have the labor force. Go get them. Tell them they just all got hired. There's never been that type of population in Egypt that was enslaved at any point in history that had the numbers to build the things that exist in Egypt today, that are still standing today. The specific task, again, was brick and mortar. The pyramids are brick and mortar. Specifically, they're limestone. There is evidence of Hebrew slaves out in the quarries of Serebit el-Kadim that are crying out to God. Now, when we read in Exodus, what does it say? I am the Lord your God, and I heard the children of Israel crying out to me, and I have come to deliver them with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Now, the next thing I want to take a look at, in verse 15 introduces who the Pharaoh is at this time. The Pharaoh at this time was Thutmose III. And Thutmose III, being the Pharaoh at this time, makes perfect sense. Adopted heirs and adopted children and firstborns were all named after their fathers. Who was the son of the Pharaoh, as Brother Clay is going to be discussing? Who was the adopted son of Pharaoh? Moses. Thutmose III. Moses and Thutmose mean the same thing in Egyptian: to draw out from water. Thutmose III is the Pharaoh at this time, I believe, and many others believe. Now take a look what he institutes. The population is grown out of control, apparently working the men to the point of death where they were dropping like flies. Laboring in the fields was not putting the population under control. So the Pharaoh institutes a new policy. From now on, any male child born, you are to kill it. And by the way, it was a brutal way it was done. A very brutal way it was done. From the historical resources I've researched, as soon as the child was born and the umbilical cord was cut, they would take the baby by the legs and they would hit it over a rock and then throw it in the Nile. Again, you want to know why I don't weep any tears when I read about the wrath that God brought on the Egyptians. And what happens? Of course, God is there. God's been there the whole time. He puts it into the midwives, and the midwives go against Pharaoh's edict. And God also, being God and knowing all things before it ever happens, knows that there may be midwives who would fear Pharaoh, so the women ended up giving birth before the midwives could even get there. Now, is this a prophetic foreshadow of something? Is it a prophetic foreshadow of something? Specifically dealing with the first advent of the Messiah? Go to Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, verses 12 through 16. Then being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to where? Egypt. And stay there until I bring you word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I called my son. So, two things there. Israel started out in the land of Israel, and then they went where? To Egypt. They went to Egypt only to do what? Return back to Israel. The king of Israel is born, and where does he go? The land of Egypt. And only to leave Egypt to return back where? Back to the land of Israel. Next thing to notice, this is a prophetic foreshadow because this event would repeat again. The horrible, evil, sinister decree of Pharaoh Thutmose III would repeat again. And it would repeat again from the phony king of Israel in 1st century named Herod. Because guess what Herod decreed right when Messiah was born? They went out and they killed the firstborn children. Does that horrible event have anything to do with the last days? I would say yes. I would say yes, and it's displayed here in our country. Do you realize the number of unborn babies that have been slaughtered on our soil exceeds the numbers that were killed in Egypt? We have butchered millions of innocent unborn babies since a very, very wicked court decision was made. And I tell you what, every one of us should thank God we were able to be born. And you want to know the irony? The people who think this is a wonderful idea. The people who think and who came up with the idea to kill unborn children and call it a procedure. It's funny, they're all for it. They came up with it, and yet they were allowed to be born. The terrible decree that Pharaoh Thutmose III happened again in first century Israel, and then it began to happen again in the Western Hemisphere. Is it a prophetic foreshadow? I can't see any other event in ancient history that even comes close to this. Absolutely, it is a prophetic foreshadow. And I tell you what, and there are many patriotic people who won't like this statement, but it's a truth and I'm going to say it. You better darn well believe God's fist of wrath is going to fall on this country, because this country is going to answer for one of the worst genocides ever. Better believe it. Better believe it. And I tell you what, God, who in Scripture tells us that before any child is born, already has their name, already knows the number of hairs that's going to be on their head. You hear the abortionists say all the time, "Oh, it's not a human being. It's not a human being. It's not a human being." God already knew the hairs that would be on that child's head, and already knew the name of that child before it was ever conceived. Tell me it's not a human. Tell me it's not a human. And I got news for you. God's wrath is going to be fierce when it's time to pay up. I personally don't see. And of course, there are women who have children who support abortion. I don't see how any woman or any human being can hold a son or daughter of theirs and at the same time go, "No, it's a right to have an abortion." How twisted is that? How twisted is that? God help us. But I tell you, it will stop one day. When the Lord returns, all the folly, all the sickness, all the cruelty is going to end when the Lord puts his foot down on the Mount of Olives. And when he comes, he's not coming as a meek man from Nazareth to be mocked and killed. He's coming back as the most fiercest warrior the universe has ever known. And he's going to come back and he's going to clean house. And when he comes back, never ever again will the cry of a child ever be heard. Never again will there be a funeral. Never again will a baby not know the gift of life. Amen? All right. Brother Clay. Yes.
Tonight? What time? I have no idea what time it is, but we're pretty long. Like 14, 15.
You want to go next?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll turn it off right
Due to time, Brother Clay's message will be given next week and will be recorded and available